He was just scratching near a pile of rubble until the ground gave way. What lay beneath that old warehouse stopped even the toughest officers cold. But what Rocco uncovered next, nobody was ready for. Before we get into it, tell me your dog's name in the comments. Let's see how many legends we have watching. The autumn air carried a biting chill, sharp enough to cut through the layers of dust that hung over the rubble of what once was a textile warehouse on the city's forgotten edge. Demolished weeks ago due to structural decay, the lot had since become a holding ground for broken bricks, twisted metal, and the silence that follows something once loud and alive. The neighborhood had mostly moved on, but something in the ground had not. Officer Remen, a decorated canine handler with the city's search and rescue division, tightened the leash on his German Shepherd partner, Rocco. The dog, an experienced search companion, stood tall and focused, his eyes scanning the uneven terrain with attention that seemed almost unnatural for what was supposed to be a routine training drill. Their task was straightforward. The squad had been asked to conduct a safety assessment in the area. Construction crews were set to move in and clear the foundation next week. The old warehouse's demolition had left deep pockets beneath the soil, pits that could collapse under weight. Their job was to mark the weak points and ensure safety for the workers. But from the moment they arrived, something about Rocco changed. The dog's tail stiffened. His ears perked at every gust of wind that swept through the site. His nose stayed low to the ground, even as Remen called out to him for the usual training cues. Rocco was not following protocol. He was following something else, something invisible, something buried. The officer crouched down beside his companion, brushing loose dust from the dog's coat. Rocco was tense, staring fixedly toward a crumbled corner where the warehouse's southern loading dock had once stood. The dog's body quivered, not from fear, from fixation. "Easy," Remen whispered, though he already knew the dog was locked in. Then it happened. Rocco broke formation and dashed toward the mound of broken concrete. His paws clawed at the gravel. Nails scraped against metal, brick, and clay. He began to dig, violently, urgently, as if the ground itself had done him wrong. Remen ran after him, yelling to the backup team across the lot, but Rocco would not stop. Dust flew, pebbles scattered. The sound of claws on stone echoed against the hollow steel frames that still stood nearby. This was not behavior typical of Rocco. He was trained, disciplined, and deliberate. But now, he was possessed by a drive Remen had never seen before in him. Soon, a small crowd formed. A few workers from the nearby construction office leaned against the fencing, watching the scene unfold. One of them recorded it on his phone. They expected, perhaps, that the dog had sniffed out a squirrel or a lost piece of meat. None of them expected what came next. Rocco suddenly paused, his head tilted. He lowered his face and began whining, low, almost mournful. That sound traveled down the spine of every person watching. Remen's stomach knotted. He knelt and reached into the disturbed soil, brushing away dust with his gloved hand. Then he saw it, a fragment of fabric. It was faded, stained, and coated with a thin layer of concrete dust. But it was unmistakably fabric, a sleeve maybe, and beneath it something pale. Remen called it in. The sirens came not for a drill, but for something much darker. Within the hour, the site was flooded with yellow tape, forensic vans, and officers. Rocco sat silently beside his handler, his breathing slow but uneasy. He refused to take his eyes off the hole he had opened. He knew something was still in there. As the forensics team began to carefully excavate the site, they revealed a disturbing scene. Human remains, small bones, delicate, not adult-sized. The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared say it aloud, but the truth hung heavy in the air. These were the bones of a child. The questions started pouring in. Why here? Who could it be? The warehouse had been abandoned for nearly 4 years before its demolition. There were no missing child reports linked to the area in recent records. No homeless encampments nearby. No shelters reported unaccounted children. And yet, here it was. A child's body buried beneath a slab of concrete where a delivery dock once stood. The discovery made headlines overnight. But for Riemann, it was not the headlines that haunted him. It was Rocco's behavior. That night, Riemann sat on the floor beside his dog's crate, watching the German Shepherd pace restlessly inside. Rocco refused to sleep. He circled and sniffed the corners, pausing every few minutes to stare toward the window. Riemann could see the same intensity in his eyes as earlier. The dog was not done. Something else was out there. The next day, Riemann requested the full layout of the old warehouse before demolition. Blueprints arrived showing the loading dock, maintenance tunnels, and underground pipes. But one thing stood out: a narrow crawl space beneath the southern dock. It had not been filled in during demolition, likely because it was missed during inspection. He brought Rocco back the next morning, escorted by a small forensics team and a structural engineer. They began clearing the space around the crawlway. The soil was loose and parts of the tunnel's wall had already collapsed. But there was room enough to send Rocco inside. As soon as they reached the entrance, Rocco lunged forward again. Ears forward, nose pressed to the dirt, tail rigid. He began sniffing with wild focus, then scratched the tunnel wall once, twice, 3 times. It was then that one of the forensics officers noticed something stuck between the bricks. Shreds of plastic. Torn, faded, buried. They extracted it carefully. A broken piece of a children's backpack. This was no isolated accident. This was no case of a lost child. Someone had placed the child in that tunnel, hidden them. The temperature dropped sharply in that moment, not in the air, but in everyone's chest. For Riemann, the realization was both devastating and clarifying. This was not a one-layer mystery. This was a place where something terrible had happened. And the deeper they dug, the more certain he became that this was not the end. Just the beginning. Rocco stood at the entrance of the tunnel, unmoving. His eyes stared into the dark crevice like he saw something no one else could. Not a ghost, not a vision, but a memory, a smell, a trace of what had happened there. It was not fear in his posture, it was duty. The dog turned to Riemann and gave a single, low bark, then looked back at the tunnel again. There was more. He knew it, and now so did Riemann. Rain started to fall softly over the lot as dawn broke. The debris glistened under the gray morning sky, but no one moved to take shelter. Every officer, technician, and forensic investigator was now standing on alert. What was once a demolished shell of a warehouse had turned into an active crime scene, and at the center of it all stood a dog breathing heavy, covered in dust, and staring down a forgotten passage that led into the earth. Rocco had barely slept the night before, and neither had Officer Riemann. Something about the backpack fragment confirmed what the dog had sensed long before anyone else did. This place was never just an abandoned building. It was a secret graveyard, a hidden chapter in a story no one ever wanted to read. The forensic crew carefully widened the crawl space entrance. Every movement sent vibrations through the packed soil, and caution was critical. The team placed steel supports along the tunnel walls while a portable lamp was lowered inside. The beam of light revealed what looked like a narrow maintenance channel once used for underground wiring and utilities. But there were no wires now, just dirt, silence, and a lingering chill that crept beneath everyone's skin. Riemann looked down at Rocco. The dog was seated, still as stone, but his eyes twitched with anticipation. His chest rose and fell faster. He was waiting for the command. "Let him go," the structural engineer nodded cautiously. Riemann unclipped the leash. Without hesitation, Rocco dropped low and entered the tunnel, inching forward with deliberate sniffs and heavy breaths. His ears flicked at each tiny creak in the soil. His paws made almost no sound. The dog was in his element now, tracking, hunting, uncovering. Every few meters he paused and sniffed the tunnel walls, sometimes circling spots in the soil. Riemann followed closely behind, crouching, brushing aside cobwebs and loose stone. A forensic assistant kept pace behind him, camera in hand, documenting every moment. Then Rocco froze. His nose touched the wall and his tail lowered slightly. The officer behind Riemann stepped forward with a flashlight, aiming the beam where the dog pointed. Embedded in the wall were 3 small indentations, scratches, uneven and erratic. A child's hand might have made them, someone trying to claw their way out. The realization hit like a hammer. Remen reached forward and scraped the dirt gently with his gloved hand. More marks appeared, and there, another shred of cloth, a different color than the first. Not one child, there had been more than one. By now, the tunnel had stretched nearly 15 meters beneath what used to be the warehouse floor. Another small chamber opened up at the end, circular and tight, maybe 5 feet across. It looked like a service pod, a dead end once used to house junction boxes. Inside, Rocco whined. Remen squeezed in beside him, and what he saw stole the breath from his lungs. 2 small sets of shoes, decayed but clearly placed side by side, laces knotted neatly, untouched by scavengers. In the corner of the chamber, a rusted lunchbox, cracked open, revealing a faded sticker inside, a cartoon character from years ago. These were not random remnants. They were belongings, personal, emotional. The weight of what happened here sunk into Remen's chest like concrete. As the team documented everything, they called in reinforcements, cadaver dogs, excavation equipment, psychological support. What had begun as a structural sweep had now become a full-scale criminal investigation. Over the following days, Rocco led the team to 3 additional pockets within the earth, each one containing evidence of small lives once lived. A barrette, a pencil, a toy. None of it belonged underground. All of it was buried with intention. The news broke again, and this time the city could not ignore it. What had once been seen as a routine demolition site now became front-page headlines. Underground chambers reveal buried truths beneath warehouse grounds. The public demanded answers, but answers were hard to come by. The original warehouse records were vague. Ownership had changed hands several times before the building was abandoned. One of the owners was a holding company registered under a false address. No employees had ever filed complaints or reports related to disappearances on site. Even old utility records seemed incomplete. The warehouse had always operated on the city's periphery in every sense. It had been forgotten before it had even closed. But someone had not forgotten. Someone had come back again and again. Someone had used the hidden tunnels to cover what could never be spoken about in daylight. And somehow Rocco knew. Not the facts, but the truth buried in the silence. On the 6th day of excavation, as clouds gathered and a storm rolled toward the city's edge, Rocco did something he had not done all week. He pulled Remen not toward the tunnels, but away from them, back across the lot, past the loading dock, toward a rusted dumpster half filled with debris. The dog's body was low, his paws dragging as he sniffed the concrete. He stopped at a spot near a toppled steel beam and began scratching, slowly, methodically. Remen watched, his breath held tight. He crouched again. The same signs, the same behavior as before. The ground looked undisturbed, but Rocco was never wrong. Crews were called in again, and the area was cordoned off. They brought in ground-penetrating radar. The scan revealed a hollow cavity beneath the beam, 2 feet deep, roughly rectangular. A box. They dug carefully, and there it was, a weathered metal container, military style, reinforced, sealed with a broken lock. Inside, bundled in plastic and wrapped with moldy fabric, were dozens of photographs. Children, taken in low light, some blurry, some too sharp, but it was the setting that drew the breath from every onlooker. They were taken inside the old warehouse. Same walls, same beams, the same floor now reduced to rubble. These were not just missing children. They had been here, documented, trapped, and Rocco had led them right to the evidence. What came next unraveled fast. The authorities issued statements. Old suspects were re-examined. A previous warehouse manager, now living under a new name in another province, was brought in for questioning. More connections emerged. A forgotten court case from 8 years prior, buried under bureaucracy, referenced unexplained noises heard from the storage basement. But none of it would have surfaced had Rocco not scratched at that first spot in the soil. The city had turned away from this site for years. The dog never did, As the storm finally broke overhead, Rocco sat beneath a tarp beside Riemann, watching investigators haul away box after box of evidence. The rain lashed down hard, but the dog sat still, shoulders square, ears up. Riemann leaned against the wall, soaked but grounded. He looked at Rocco and gave a nod. He had trusted the dog on every mission, but this was something else. This was beyond training. This was loyalty, memory, intuition born from a bond so deep it did not require words. The rain blurred the city's skyline in the distance, but on that broken lot, clarity had finally begun to emerge. Still, one question lingered. Why had the dog led them there in the first place? Had he caught a scent from years ago? Had someone returned recently? Or was it something else? Something far more silent and persistent? Whatever the answer, Riemann knew one thing. Rocco was not finished yet. Not until every truth buried beneath that earth was brought into the light. The city moved forward, but the ground beneath the demolished warehouse refused to rest. A week had passed since Rocco uncovered the photographs. The discovery had ignited a storm of investigations across multiple jurisdictions. Files once buried deep in archives were now being exhumed like the bodies they mirrored. The city moved forward, but the ground beneath the demolished warehouse refused to rest. A week had passed since Rocco uncovered the photographs. The discovery had ignited a storm of investigations across multiple jurisdictions. Files once buried deep in archives were now being exhumed like the bodies they mirrored. A pattern began to emerge. Missing children, all from underprivileged neighborhoods, all within a 10-year window. None of the cases had ever made national news. No one had connected the dots. Until now. Until Rocco scratched the surface. The city had never planned for justice to rise from its forgotten corners. But sometimes the most important truths do not come from boardrooms or courtrooms. They come from instincts, from devotion, from a dog who refused to walk past silence. For Officer Riemann, the weight of what they had uncovered pressed on his shoulders daily. He had worked dozens of K-9 deployments in the past, many of them dangerous, some of them tragic, but nothing had cut so deep, so relentlessly as this one. And Rocco, his partner, his protector, his friend, had changed. The dog no longer barked at neighborhood squirrels or responded to training cues with eager enthusiasm. He was quieter now, focused, as if he still carried something within him that had yet to be fully released. Rocco had led the team to 4 distinct child-sized graves under the warehouse. The photos found near the rusted beam suggested at least 6 children had once been in that place. That meant 2 were still unaccounted for. 2 more unmarked spaces waiting to be found. Riemann returned to the site every day with Rocco. Sometimes the dog would sniff and circle without settling. Other times he would sit beside the edge of the foundation and simply wait, as if listening, as if remembering. Then one morning, just after the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, Rocco moved with purpose. He pulled Riemann not to the tunnels, not to the buried chambers, but beyond the foundation toward the back alley that had once served as a service road for delivery trucks. Half of it was paved over, but part of it had caved in years ago and been left untouched during demolition. A collapsed drainage culvert now ran beneath it, half swallowed by earth and roots. Rocco began to growl. It was low, steady, not from aggression but urgency. Riemann called for backup. The team arrived with radar equipment and excavation tools, now well practiced from the previous digs. They scanned the culvert and found another hollow, a wide cavity beneath the concrete slab, cracked, sinking, hidden by time. As they dug, the smell changed. The soil turned heavier, more organic. It was a smell no one wanted to admit they recognized. And then the spade hit wood, a makeshift box, rotten at the corners, unnailed, not meant to last. The lid was lifted carefully. Inside were the final 2. They had not been placed together by accident. Their arms crossed, heads turned toward each other, peaceful, as though someone had tried to comfort them in their final moments. A ribbon still clung to one wrist. A sticker was pressed against a shoe sole. The forensic officer stepped back in silence. The air turned still. Rowan removed his cap. He looked at Rocco, who sat a few feet away, eyes locked on the box, unmoving. They had found them all, 6 children, 6 stories stolen before they could be lived, but now 6 names would be spoken again. Within days, each child was identified through DNA matches with distant relatives, old-school records, and volunteer-run missing persons registries. Families who had waited years, decades, finally got answers. Burials were arranged, grave sites named, memorials erected. The city changed after that. A commission was formed to investigate the failure in tracking missing children. Abandoned properties were reassessed. Laws were passed mandating deeper inspections before demolitions. Anonymous tip lines were reopened. New protocols were created in memory of what had been lost. And in the middle of all that movement, a single dog stood as the thread that had pulled it all together. Rocco became more than a K9. He became a symbol, not for heroism born in battle, but for truth born in silence. 3 months later, on a cold winter morning, a small crowd gathered at the newly named Children's Rest Memorial Park, a green space erected on the very land where the warehouse once stood. The grass had not yet fully grown back and the soil was still healing, but the 6 names engraved into the stone monument stood firm. Flowers rested at its base, small toys, messages from strangers. Raymond stood at the front, dressed in full uniform. Rocco sat at his side, his fur brushed clean, his badge glinting under the low sun. He was calm but alert, eyes never still, always watching, always reading the air. A city official spoke, but Raymond barely heard the words. He looked at the children's names carved into granite and thought of the tunnel walls, the scratches, the shoes, the quiet toys left behind. When it was his turn to speak, Rissman walked to the podium. He said nothing at first. He looked down at Rocco, and then softly he spoke. This story was never about me, or the officers, or even the investigators. It was about those children, and the dog who refused to leave them forgotten. He paused, then looked at the crowd. There is something sacred about the way animals feel things we cannot, the way they carry memories in scent, in silence, in posture. My partner did not just follow a trail. He followed a cry we could no longer hear. He looked down again. Rocco had his eyes closed now, resting. But he heard it. The crowd stood in silence. After the ceremony, Raymond knelt down beside Rocco and took off his collar, replacing it with a newer one, a ceremonial clasp engraved with the date of their first discovery. Rocco sniffed it once and leaned against him gently. It was a quiet ending. There were no parades, no fireworks, just a bond sealed by earth and time, a partnership built not on glory but on trust. As the last of the mourners left and the winter wind began to rise, Raymond and Rocco sat by the monument a little longer, side by side. No words spoken, no words needed, just the silent presence of a dog who had scratched at the past and uncovered the truth no one else had dared to face. If this story gave you chills and made you feel something real, just wait till you see what's coming next. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment, and drop a like to show some love for heroes like Rocco. You'll regret skipping the next one.